welcome to another special edition of Mississippi Stories. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, editor-at-large and editorial cartoonist right here at Mississippi Today. Hey, thanks for watching today. And as you might remember, we are doing a special series of interviews up until the Mississippi Book Festival, which will be August 19th on a Saturday at the Mississippi Capitol. And if you hadn't had a chance to ever go to the Mississippi Book Festival, I got to tell you, it is truly one of the crown jewels of Mississippi. A lot of great chances for you to get to meet some of your favorite authors, just like I'm getting to do today. I'm a big fan of this guy just because I've stumbled across his work on History is Lunch. I saw the presentation you did, the Civil War Diary of Belle Daniel, and fell down that rabbit hole. And you also did the excellent book with Doug Shanks called The History of South Jackson.
Right.
So when I saw the new book, Once We Crowned Royalty, pop up, I said, well, I need to get a good read on this. And just a little background before I tell you about his background. I moved here in 1996 to the Jackson area, and I've drawn a lot of cartoons about Jackson mayors and Jackson councilmen and Jackson issues. And I drew a lot of cartoons about Harvey Johnson. And the one thing I agree with Harvey about, Mayor Johnson, was the fact that Jackson is truly the trunk of the tree, that without Jackson being vibrant and surviving, then obviously the areas around it will struggle. And I truly believe that. I got here in 96. Like I said, it's changed a lot in the 30 years that I've been here almost. But your book, Vincent Venturini, is with me here today. You retired, in 2014 from Mississippi
Valley State
Yeah, you were the assistant provost?
Associate.
I knew I got the ASS part, but I didn't want to say, well, he was an ass. I didn't want to do that. That would be bad.
It's been said before.
I do like one thing of how you describe yourself, that you're a social welfare historian, that you write history from below, looking up. And I think that's important because sometimes the official version of history is how the person who is telling you that history wants it to be. But when you get it from honest, everyday people, and there's an awful lot of it in this book that really gave me some great context on that. So congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, like I said, you got more degrees than a thermometer. You got your BA in sociology from Mississippi State, your master's from Southern Miss, and then your doctorate from Alabama in social work. So obviously, but what got you into becoming kind of the historian side of what you do?
Well, that goes back to my boyhood. Ever since I took my first history course in the 5th grade at St. Teresa's, I just loved history. And when I earned my PhD in social work, I had a concentration in social welfare history, and I studied under Paul Stewart, one of the acknowledged experts in that field. And he and Clark Chambers were the ones who taught me about history from below. Don't find out just what the social workers have written and the politicians have written about welfare. See what the recipients had to say about how they were treated. And so I kind of take that approach into these local histories. Another thing, and I'm glad to hear you say that Jackson is the trunk, and without it, the surrounding areas won't do as well. I'm a native Jacksonian. Yeah. I've lived in Ridgeland for years. It actually broke my heart to have to move from Jackson, but it just got to the point, services were declining. I couldn't get police to respond, so I moved to Ridgeland. But I don't get into Jackson bashing, and I get tired when I hear people bashing Jackson.
Yeah.
Because the city I grew up in was a very good city, very nice city, and there's still a lot of good people there. So I want to go ahead and get down those years of Jackson, and not that it was just white people, but all these different groups that we had who made Jackson special, and the courage of the civil rights workers and all of that.
I thought, and this is from chapter 7, and I'm going to flip back to my notes here real quick. And chapter 7 was called Not Our Greatest Hours, which was based on, and I can't believe it, like when they were going to do the centennial in the state, they were going to call it Our Greatest Hour,
Right.
Okay, that was ironic slightly, but you took on this, but you actually ended up working with one of the ladies who sat at the counter.
That's right.
The Woolworths. Yeah.
That's right. She was the leader of the Woolworths sit-in while there was a concurrent sit-in going on by the J.C. Penney's.
Yeah.
And this was the nicest lady, very quiet and demure.
Literally on the cusp of history,
She was. And I found out she had been in the sit-in, and I asked her about it. And she never expressed anger or hate or anything, but she talked about it.
Yeah.
And later I'd see pictures of her in the paper when the Clarion Ledger would do some retrospectives on the civil rights movement. And one of her just looking so angry marching through the streets of Jackson. It was a Sunday morning, so I called her. And it was like, I called her about 7 or 7:30. I said, Lena, you're in the newspaper today in Jackson. And you look mad. And she called me later and said, I went and got the newspaper. Yeah, I did look mad.
I bet she was at the moment, so.
She was very determined.
But you did, you touch on the different groups that kind of provided the fabric and added the seasoning, in a way, everything from the Greek families, and there weren't that many Greek families that lived in Mississippi per se, but it seems like they had a huge impact and particularly when it came to food.
The restaurant industry, there were, I'm of Italian descent, although my father is from Ohio, but the thing, there were probably just as many Italian surnames as Greek surnames, and maybe even Lebanese, but they did not form a whole because, for one, they didn't come from the same communities in the old country, and another, they didn't occupy a single occupational block. The Greeks in their restaurants, the Lebanese in their clothing stores. So you had very visible Greek and Lebanese communities. Plus you had the Greek church.
Yeah.
And it was named Holy Trinity and St. John the Theologian because the Greeks who settled in Jackson came from two distinct regions of Greece. Some came from the Isle of Patmos, which is where the Apostle John spent his last years living in a cave and wrote the book of Revelations. The others came from Peloponnese, which, the Peloponnesian Wars from ancient history. Well, the ones who were from Peloponnesians wanted to name it Holy Trinity, which was a common name for Greek churches. The ones from the Isle of Patmos, no, we got to call it St. John. So they just simply put the two names together.
They did a little hyphen and mashed it together.
It was great. It was a beautiful church too.
Well, you talk about two of my favorite restaurants. Of course, the Elite, which is now closed, and the Mayflower, which is
still open.
Still open. Okay, so the Elite, and I remember going to eat there. We'd always, when I worked at the Clarion Ledger, we'd always go to different restaurants and everything. And Mr. Pete used to scare me. He was so tough. If you were eating and you were done and you were just talking, he would come and bust your table and get you out of there.
He sure would.
He was tough.
He very much.
But he was a sweet guy too. That's what I love about what you wrote about him too. You kind of gave his backstory a little bit.
Well, I got that from his son-in-law, Chuck Odom, and I really love the story that Chuck told about a honeymoon couple that was staying at a hotel nearby.
Yeah. And
they went there to eat, and the man forgot his wallet, and he was all embarrassed, and he said to Mr. Pete, I can go to the hotel if you don't mind and, get my wallet, but we're on our honeymoon. And Mr. Pete said, I tell you what, this is gonna be my present to you.
Wow.
But don't tell anybody.
Yeah, don't tell me because I don't want this to happen again. But that's awesome. That's awesome. They had the best veal in the world too. Oh my gosh, their veal was so good.
And
with cream sauce.
Long before there were Mexican restaurants in Mississippi, he was serving enchiladas.
Yeah. Definitely on that. Mr. Mike down at the Mayflower too. And his background, this guy literally was a bad A during the war.
He was a war hero.
He was a war hero. He was, he was part. He was behind the lines and fighting against the Germans, and
Well, Hitler gave the order that if any of these Greek commandos were captured, they were to be immediately killed.
Yeah.
Even if they had uniforms on and were military, because they were inflicting so much damage on the Germans in Greece.
Yeah.
And but he was a tough guy, but very religious and very much a part of our community. Now, if you look in the book too, there's a picture of Doug Shanks, Bill Waller Jr., Art Doty, Jerry Canturis.
Everybody at the Mayflower.
Yeah, and myself.
Yeah.
At the Mayflower.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's a great picture. And when I got the picture, I had to call all of them. Do y'all mind if I use this picture in the book?
Yeah, definitely. Of course, Doug, of course, you wrote the book together on South Jackson on that too. A little bit. You start the book kind of talking about downtown and, like I said, I worked at the Clarion Ledger for all those years, and right there on the edge of where Town Creek was. And Town Creek was a big, obviously, problem for a long time, and the
Very
railroad
much.
tracks were a big problem. And so by making Lamar Street, they ended up solving that problem by putting a lot of Town Creek underwater, and then they built the railroad trestle. Just kind of neat to see how downtown evolved, and then all the retail establishments, and that's where the Jewish community came in. And there were
Very
so
much.
many, and it's kind of sad in the way now, there's really no sign of it except for the Cohen Brothers sign that's on
That's
Cowles
all.
on the street.
And I think too, there's an old painting of an old business, Jewish business on one of the walls down
Yeah.
there. I think they worked on watches or something. But, you know, downtown Jackson, and a lot of people didn't recognize it as such, was very cosmopolitan 60 or 70 years ago.
Yeah,
You were going into Lebanese-owned businesses, Jewish-owned businesses, Greek restaurants.
and Fair Street was right off of it too.
Ferry
so,
Street?
yeah, which was hopping. I mean, it was amazing.
Well, Ferry Street had a lot of different businesses,
Yeah.
including Lebanese-owned businesses. But you had to dress to go downtown in those days.
Yeah.
You didn't. It would have been socially unacceptable to go casually.
Yeah,
And that included Ferry Street. I've seen pictures of Ferry Street from the 1940s, and all the gentlemen were dressed up, walking down Ferry Street shopping, and the ladies. It was a family Saturday when you went downtown.
yeah. It's definitely a much different, I guess, vibe now when you go downtown on that. But it's still, and like I said, there's still remnants of the buildings, and it's kind of fascinating seeing that. And one of the areas too that, you know, you touched on, you talked about the churches, particularly the ones out in West Jackson, which are, you know, some of them are abandoned, some of them are still fighting and staying in there. To me, Calvary Baptist Church, I spoke there a few years ago, and, you know, this huge church, and not a terribly large congregation, but Linda Smith is
She's
a
great.
rock star. She's just amazing.
Great.
Reverend Linda Smith is incredible.
You know, when the Southern Baptist Convention decided that they wanted to disaffiliate churches that had female pastors.
Yeah.
And there was a debate going on online about that, and some man wrote in the book of, in Paul's letter to so-and-so, it says, women shall not preach to men. And I was in one of my mischievous moods. I responded, yeah, well, Paul never had a wife.
Oh, excellent. I know I was about to go there, but I figured I'd let you do it too, because I got an anniversary coming up. I don't want to get in trouble if my wife sees this video on it. But like I said, Calvary Baptist Church, like I said, it's still going. It's huge. The building was. But, you know, St. Mary's is the one that church, which is over near Hardy Middle School,
Right.
over in that area. Absolutely one of the most gorgeous buildings in the world. And then I guess because of foundation problems and dwindling congregation, I imagine that in Jackson, foundation problems. That's probably actually
That is.
destroyed more buildings
It
in Jackson
has.
than anything
Yeah,
else.
the
Yeah.
Yazoo clay.
Yeah,
See, I was baptized in the original St. Mary's Church, which became the gym.
yeah,
That beautiful Gothic church was built in the early 50s, opened about 1955 or so. And in the wealth of the parish, they managed to pay that church off in 3 years.
wow.
Whereas St. Teresa's, where I grew up, it took them years and years to pay the debt off. And then when they split the parish into two, St. Mary's, of course, retained the fairly affluent merchants and businessmen and lawyers of West Jackson, and those of us in growing South Jackson, more lower middle class, white collars, blue collars, couldn't match the splendor and all of St. Mary's. In fact, my parish, St. Teresa, always lived sort of in the shadow of St. Mary's, the same as Holy Family always lived in the shadow of St. Richard's.
Yeah. So you talk a little bit at the end, and it's where the title comes over, We Once Crowned Royalty. And I did not realize this, and there was a ball every year that was sponsored originally for the old ladies home, which, by the way,
Right.
I didn't know. I know the building where the old ladies home was. I never knew about the old ladies home until that. Real quickly, tell me a little bit, what was the old ladies home?
By the late 19th century, there was a problem with more and more women having nowhere to go or having to stay with relatives where they weren't always made to feel welcome.
I would imagine after the Civil War too, with the
There
high,
were
with the
a
high
growing
death rate
number of
widows.
widows of Civil War veterans.
Yeah,
And some very prominent people from Madison County in the Flora area decided we need to do something. And so they started trying to come up with an idea to build a home for women who had nowhere to go. And what helped was Mrs. Longino, whose husband was Governor Longino. He was governor when the Capitol building was built. Was a part of it, and her husband gave them a lot of advice. It was in Yelverton, a member of the Yelverton family, and they were the prominent family of Ridgeland. In fact, the Ridgeland City Cemetery grew up around the old Yellowly. It was Yellowly, not Yelverton, but the Yellowly family cemetery. They were involved. It all came together, and they did some fundraisers, and people were behind them. And that old lady's home was a state-of-the-art building with the latest technologies when it opened. Even when I was a young adult, I remember driving by there and still seeing some older women sitting out on the porch.
Oh, wow.
Now, people always told me there was an old man's home nearby, but I've never...
You never found the old man's home?
No, and it may have been nearby. I'm sure it was in West Jackson.
Yeah. So, obviously, I mean, I've kind of jumped around the book a lot, and that's what I like. You talk about the development of certain things, and there's certain businesses that you talk about and how they got started, and it was neat, and it's neat to see how some of them have survived, through the different generations now and so forth. But, in the time that we have remaining a little bit, what overall do you want people to get out of this book?
Well, one thing that when I wrote the first chapter and discussing how downtown became such a prominent area, one thing I thought people would pick up on, and it's one thing they haven't, is how changes in women's fashions created all these new markets that led to downtowns everywhere developing because ladies ready to wear.
Yeah.
And the fashions. And you had all of these merchants in Jackson going to Chicago, going to New York on buying trips. And it was making Jackson a part of the overall scene nationally in fashions. Another thing, just the planning that went into Jackson. I mean, people sat down and said, we got to do something about Town Creek. Let's build a de facto bridge over it.
Yeah.
And also by building Lamar Street, you help develop the downtown area because that gives you another cross street.
Yeah.
And then raising the railroad tracks. So it was real planning that went into Jackson. And you've always had competition and even conflict between politicians, but they can seem to get together on business and on education. I think another thing too, and I've never been a follower of beauty pageants. I mean, I never sat down and watched a Miss America pageant, but I would always ask somebody when it was over, how did Miss Mississippi do? And, I looked at the carnival ball, I thought that really was an important thing in Jackson. I even played at one of them, because I was a member of the St. Joe Band.
Yeah.
And a Catholic banker was leading the ball that year, so naturally he invited us. And, but other than that, I guess it's just, people need rituals.
Yeah.
And I think all of these rituals, and you'll see that I have pictures of various young men and women who were part of these pageants. Lanier High School, that was a photo from Richard Beadle, who was a noted black photographer for decades in Jackson. So I think that one thing Jackson lost was a sense of identity, an identity that comes through these shared experiences.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, obviously, and you discuss flight and talk about some of the reasons behind it and so forth on that. And I think, and just from my time being here, I just know that when a lot of the family-owned businesses sold out to corporations, that ended up, you lost a lot of the charity that you would have back and pouring back into the community.
Very much.
That's on that. So obviously, you leave, the book, like I said, the book is fascinating because if you're interested in Jackson and the history and you see what things are now and what they could be or what they were, whatever, it's just, this book does a great job giving you the context of that. You did an excellent job on that.
I appreciate that.
As we wrap up, like I said, you leave it on kind of a bittersweet note. You obviously, you can tell that you growing up here and your love for it is there, and your hope that as things get better, but you're also, you're just, it's kind of sad when you see some of the things that you grew up with, obviously not quite the same.
Well, I'll conclude my bit by saying that the book that I wrote here and the one I co-authored with Doug Shanks, I see those as love letters to home.
Yeah.
And remembering the best times.
Yeah, definitely on that. Well, I appreciate it. Like I said, the book is We Once Crowned Royalty. It's a good read. It really is. Helps you kind of fill in some pieces about Jackson and about its history, and I think it was very well done. And like I said, I have a new respect now for Mr. Mike and Mr. Pete that I did not have before. I no longer fear Mr. Pete, and I just appreciate him a little bit. But like I said, there's so many pieces of what makes Jackson Jackson in this book, and you did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. All right, well, that concludes another edition of Mississippi Stories. Hey, you can go to MississippiToday.org, check out our great coverage, a few okay cartoons, and also more episodes of Mississippi Stories as well. And, he mentioned beauty pageants. We're going to be also interviewing Miss Mississippi as well about her children's book. So that'll be coming up probably the next week. So anyway, hey, thanks for watching, and ring the like button so make sure you can get more. Hey, thanks on behalf of everybody. This is Mississippi Stories. We'll be back next week. Thank you for watching this episode of Mississippi Stories. Make sure to subscribe to the Mississippi Today YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified every time a new video uploads.